we've got all our different items here completed, and we are ready to assemble. First things first, let's assemble these guys here. Let's start with the main part of the ornament. For that, you will need your brown yarn again, your crochet hook, and you can also use some clips or stitch markers, and you also need some stuffing. So what we want to do, and you'll see here, I haven't weaved in the ends, but I have taken them sort of on the inside so they're not going to bother us when we sew those two pieces together. But you don't really need to weave them in because that will be also on the inside, so you're not going to see it. So you save yourself some time. So we'll take these, wrong sides together, and here you'll make sure that the seams, that's where you were slip stitching, sort of match. And that just means that when you put your icing on top, then both of these seams on the front and the back are covered. And one thing that I quite like to do is I like to make sure that the last stitch or the first stitch that I used they're kind of touching like this. And then I go on my first increase, which is here, and get a stitch marker through there. And make sure that I'm on the same place on the other side as well. Let me put this back into focus. And this just helps me make sure that they are aligned and that they will stay pretty much aligned. Now, we don't need to do this, 100% right. This is quite forgiving. As long as you slip stitch those two together, and they're, you've got the same number, your hook goes through one stitch and then the next, then you'll be fine because they've got the same number of stitches. But let's start. Let's show you how this is done. So put your hook through the first, oops, let's put this right, through the stitch that you want to start at. I always like to start at the top because that means that I will basically be covering that area with the icing, so I don't need to worry about it. There we go. Put your yarn over your hook, pull through. You don't need a huge tail in this case, but again, chain one so it's nice and stable, right? Then go through the same stitch here and do a slip stitch. There you go. Perfect. Then you can tug this piece of yarn just to make sure that everything is nice and snug. If your yarn is split, make sure it's all on your hook. And then go to the second set of stitches, again making sure that it's as even as possible, that the two sides are fairly aligned. It doesn't matter too much, but as long, the more aligned they are, the nicer the finish will be. And again, slip stitch. And so we'll do this all across. We'll continue along in this way till it's about here, maybe. So right before you have your last the last increase you have done. You can see it's kind of the last bit of your hexagon here. And you see as you put those two together and you slip stitch, the angles that appear here sort of disappear, they all get smoothed. So there's no need to worry about that either. So continue in the same way, and I'll see you once I've reached this point as well, so we can stuff it together and then move on to the next step. Now that you've gone through most of your piece, first of all, you can see that it looks really nice and round, and we've got that little gap here. So what we'll do is, first of all, we'll take this little thread here, and that's from when you started your row to connect the two. That was your first slip stitch. And just weave it in a couple of times here and there. And then back down here. And then just make sure it's tucked in on the inside. And then just start filling it up with whatever extra yarn or polyfill you have. And, don't overstuff it. You don't want to be bursting in from the seams. but you do want it to be sort of nice and puffy, and that will also help you with the shape. Here I have, like I said, an assortment of yarns, but you can put polyfill. One last slip stitch here, chain one, cut your yarn, and again, because that will be covered, at least in part, by your little your icing, you know, even if it's not entirely perfect, it doesn't matter one bit. So we're just going to put through the yarn here. Again, just weave it in a couple times in and out to make sure it's secure. Again, I try to weave it in like the upper part of the body of the pudding that I know will be covered by the frosting. Just makes it easier. And then here, for example, some of my filling is coming out because I'm trying to push it with a needle. There we go, that's a better one. And here, I'm just going to pull it a bit and cut it and play with it a bit until it's all covered. And if there is even a little bit of yarn that is being a bit stubborn, then just push it in with your hook. And that's it. Make sure it looks good. And there you are. Got your little pudding ornament, both sides of it. So this is ready. And now what we need to do is take our white yarn and sew these two together. And again, we'll do that with our crochet hook. We will place a single stitch, single crochet stitches from that edge here where we did our slip stitches, and you'll put one single crochet per row essentially. And here, once we reach the middle, remember we did 11 stitches or 11 chains. So on the 6th chain, right in the middle, that's where we will place our loop, and I'll show you how to do that. And one really easy way of making sure you don't, you keep the two aligned is just to count how many stitches and then place a stitch marker on the 6th one. So what have we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we know that this one is the right one. And this way, you know you're in the right place. And one thing to remember is that you want to check which side you prefer. My preference is always for this side to appear rather than this back here, but it's really a personal preference. So I just make sure that the sides that I want to hide are together. They're touching, wrong sides together. And then again, counting. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That should be 6 there as well. Let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So now that I've counted and double checked, I'm ready to do a single crochet stitch. Well, using the single crochet stitch, just stitch around here. Again, if you want to keep this even more stable, you can clip those two together here. It's a small piece, don't necessarily need it, but if you're just starting off with crochet and you want to have that extra sort of piece of security, go ahead and do it. Here and this one here. Excellent. There we go. So just put that in there. yarn over, pull through your yarn. Don't leave too much of a tail, but we will have to weave that in afterwards. Chain one, pull it tight, and then do a single crochet stitch in that same place. There you go. Again, go slightly slower here because you're not stitching in kind of stitches, you're kind of going on the sides. In some ways, all you need to do is just make sure that you place as many single crochets on the one side as you will on the other. But I find that the easier thing to do is find those gaps on each row where you have done your chain ones and so on, and just place single crochet stitches there. And make sure to place some in the top one as well, right here. So you can see how, again, it's becoming more curved because we've stitched those along. And really all you need to do is do a single crochet per row essentially. You don't need more than that. If you put too many single crochets, it will warp your piece. So there's no hard rule here. Check how it is with your tension, but normally one single crochet per row should be more than enough. All right. So let's do the top now. So again, here it should be a bit easier because you are stitching into chains. It's 2. Three, 4, and 5. And here we are now at our stitch marker. So what we will do here is do our little loop. So we'll single crochet into this here, right? And then chain 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And again, if if you want a bigger loop, just keep on chaining. But essentially what you want to do once you've completed those chains is go back into the same stitch and single crochet there. Make sure it's all nice and tight. And then you do another 5. And they're in the last stitches here. And then you just go down. And here one final stitch, to go through that last part. There we go. And chain 1. me to do then now is weave in those ends. And I always like to go through the last stitch that you went through with your hook. I like to go through there and just make sure that it's the closure is nice and snug. No one will really see this here because it's quite small. And then go on the inside, go through a few stitches. This ornament is not going to get too much of a wear and tear, hopefully, so you don't need to worry too much about weaving this in too many times. But you know, if we can give this a good structure and make sure that bits don't come flying off next year, that'd be great. So here I've done a few different directions, up and down, and then once you're happy, just snip off the yarn. Perfect. And now really the majority of the work is done. What you need to do is decide on the placement of your leaves and your ivy. So you can use, just cut these pieces of yarn and use just a normal green thread and needle to sew those in place, or I like to just do it with this yarn. It's very easy. I like to offset them next to kind of the loop here. So if, you know, I just want them on the side, so here, you know, I'll put the little berries. I think right here, I'll put my leaf. Oops, there we go. And you can always check the placement that you prefer. Obviously, I like the leaves to be placed like that, and you can even maybe like offset them slightly in terms of height, so one is kind of lower than the other. Just make sure they slightly overlap, or at least when you put the berries, those overlap on top of them. And just play around with it. Do whatever you think makes it look better for you. And the reason I don't tend to place the leaves before is because I find that once you've sewn the two pieces of frosting together, you have a better idea of how the leaves would look like if you were to just put it directly when you had the single piece. Obviously it would be easier to sew it in, but I feel like you would not know where the placement of the loop is, and I think this way you can better sort of adjust for it. So I'm actually gonna change my mind. I'm gonna do it like this first one, and all I do is I go with my thread, with my darning needle, just go right next to those stitches and go through. Place my yarn, and I just go little by little, just to make sure that the leaf, this is probably not very clear for you, the leaf is nicely sewn in. It doesn't need to be too tight, but it has to be quite snug. And I personally think it's quite nice if you don't sew the whole thing. It gives your piece a bit more of a dimension. A leaf wouldn't be stuck anyways. It wouldn't be, it has some shape and structure. So I like to go up until like maybe halfway through here. And then once I'm on the underside, I just go to the place where I think I should start sewing it up on the other side. And that's how it looks on the inside. It's quite neat actually. And do that and go up the way checking that I'm happy with it. And I am for the moment. So I'll just continue along like this until I've reached the top again. And I think what's really nice about this decoration is obviously no two are the same. But you can also choose to put your ivy and holly in a completely different way. Maybe you want it down here, or maybe you want it to be right in the center. You know, you can play around with this. And I will eventually cut this end, but I will leave it here for the moment because what I want to do is I want to place this other one, and then the two ends I will just knot them together and then cut them short. Again, you know, you don't need to weave it in, or you can if you want to, of course. But as you can tell, if you left just a tiny end here, nobody would be able to see anything. We've got our 2 pieces of yarn. What I will do, I will just place a little knot here, do a second one, and again, these pieces are, you know, it's unlikely that you will be, it's not like a garment or even a blanket that would get a lot of sort of wear and tear. This is just a little ornament, so it doesn't need to be super secure. These knots will be more than enough. And there you go now. You've got these guys here. And then what I like to do is you've got these 2 ends. And what's really easy, if you want to simplify your life a bit, is first of all, try and have them in a triangular fashion here. So 1 and 2. So I place the first one, the single one first, because that helps make sure everything else looks good. And I take one piece of the yarn that we left and get it through a stitch onto the other side. And then I put my yarn through the darning needle and I go through a slightly different bit. And I yarn it again through. And if I'm happy with the placement of this little guy, then I continue adding the other ones. There we go, and this is your last piece. And I'm actually quite happy with how my little pudding is looking right now. So if I pull all of these pieces of red yarn, I know that my little berries will be sitting here and my little leaves here. So I quite like that look. So what I will do is I will fold it so I can see where all my little berries are, and they're little pieces of yarn. And I will knot them together. So the 2 pieces for each berry. I'll do a knot again. And then I'll do one bigger one. And again, you know, you can be, you know, make sure it's quite tight because you want your berry to be sitting in quite snugly. You don't want it to be loose and dangly. 1 and 2. And this last one. And I know this is looking quite messy at the moment, but it's gonna look super good in just 2 seconds. So still looking good. So now we can really commit. So take one yarn from one berry and then another one from the one next to it. You don't need to be too precise about it, but it's just good to mix things up a bit here. So this guy with this guy. There we go. It's a bit of a puzzle. You don't need to do that if you find it too confusing. I just think it makes things easier, or it gives it some extra stability. But any knot will do, even if you were just to tie them all together. that will be fine as well, and it wouldn't be too bulky. So there you go. You can do one as well here. Excellent. So now I'm just gonna cut these. I'm gonna use a pair of scissors because I think that will be slightly easier. And there we go. Doesn't this look cute? Once everything has been sewn in, then all you need to do is place your little frosting on top of your ornament, and either with a darning needle and the white yarn, but I think preferably just a conventional needle and thread, go through your ornament, leave the little tail here, or rather take your ornament, go through inside out of your ornament, leave a little bit of tail here, go back down again, make a knot so that it holds its place, and then just pick up a bit of your pudding, and in small stitches just put parts of your pudding underneath the brown main body of the pudding, and just keep on stitching it through and to the back. You don't need you see the stitches are so small you can't really see them, especially since this is a color coordinated thread, but just make sure that you pick up that brown body and go all around your pudding here to make sure that this is nice and secure, and obviously fasten off your yarn on the other side, and then your little pudding ornament will be ready. So here we are, all done. It's been sewn in. I've snipped the little pieces of yarn. You can't really see anything. And your little ornament is ready. And like we said, you can either repeat before attaching the icing to the main body. You can put another holly and ivy on the back if you want the two sides to look the same, or leave it the way it is now. And it's ready for you to hang on, in a garland or on your Christmas tree, or even in a wreath. Or you could also add it to the presents you're going to be giving away this festive season. Tie it to the ribbon, and it's a lovely sort of addition to any gift you give a loved one. So I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know how you get on. I'd be delighted to see pictures of what you've been making, if you've made this little ornament. And do let me know if you have any questions. You can reach me on Etsy. Good luck and happy crochet!